This episode of the Cult Popture Podcast was brought to you by our Patreon.
If you want to tell us which films we should watch, get up to 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, give us something to talk about in the post-credit scenes at the end of each episode, or even contribute to the discussion in the episode itself, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture.
Boy,
Whew.
I am stuffed.
Whew.
I have just eaten a human being.
Oh no, Richard! Are those fava beans I smell?
They went well with my nice Chianti.
They went well with my $9 Sauvignon Blanc.
With my mango and pineapple pals.
Wow, is that alcoholic?
Yeah. The
good.
vodka is
Oh,
the
thank
first.
God.
And the
I
listed
couldn't see.
flavors that it is, vodka is the first one.
Nice. Welcome, everybody, to the Cult Popture Podcast, specifically film franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture Podcast, where we cover a different film franchise every fortnight. Richard, we've done fucking
From
the Kissing
Godzilla to Godfather to God's Not Dead. We've done them all.
There we go. Should we just say that every episode?
Yeah.
It's such a good tagline. I'm so glad, because it also kind of does represent the spectrum of franchises, you know?
Yeah. From
yeah.
big lizards to big mafia guys to the big man in the sky.
From genetically made creatures to made men to the one who made it all. There we go. We could do this all day, but no, Richard. My name is AJ, firstly, and Richard, today it's time to buzz open the cranium of the Hannibal franchise. Sorry, it's time to buzzsaw open the cranium of the Hannibal franchise.
Yeah, and for a little treat for me, not so much for those listening at home, but AJ's webcam is going bloody bonkers.
I say we just leave it. Hopefully it'll behave, because there's so many cords down here, and
well,
I don't want to unplug one of them.
But we are talking about quite a scary franchise, and AJ, that's given me the heebie-jeebies.
Wow, that makes sense. Because, Richard, the Hannibal franchise is a series of 5 films based on 4 novels, written by Thomas Harris. The novels in order are Red Dragon in 1981, The Silence of the Lambs in 1988, Hannibal in 2001, and Hannibal Rising in 2006.
Someone ran out of ideas.
It creates a pretty interesting timeline when paired up with the 5 films, because we had Manhunter based on Red Dragon in 1986, so that came out before the release of the Silence of the Lambs novel, which I didn't know until researching this. Then The Silence of the Lambs in 1991, again before Hannibal or Rising were even written. Then Hannibal in 2001, released the same year as the book it was based off. Then Red Dragon, another Red Dragon adaptation in 2002, only a year after Hannibal, both the book and the novel. And then it was as I said, the second adaptation. And then finally Hannibal Rising in 2007, a year after the Harris penned novel, and he also penned the screenplay. So he wrote them at the same time.
Man loves to write. What can I say?
Does he, though? I reckon he ran out of ideas around the end of the 80s. But we'll see how it goes. The series, if you've never heard of, who's this Hannibal guy? Is that hilarious comedian on the Eric Andre show?
Is that the guy that revealed to the world Bill Cosby's crimes?
Yeah, no, that's actually only the third most culturally relevant Hannibal, I think. We won't be discussing the other two, but the one we will be discussing is at the centre of a series.
Wait, who's the other one?
The Roman ruler, who's a Roman guy. He's like a Hannibal the Great or some shit. It'll come up later.
Will it?
It kind of. I read a quote that mentions
Hannibal
him.
Roman guy.
There was a historical Hannibal.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
He's most famous for what he did in the Second Punic War.
Exactly! The Second Punic War, yeah. No, but the Hannibal we're talking about is at the center of a series of psychological thrillers, which are mostly based around capturing some kind of eccentric serial killer, while the lead investigator, who is either Will Graham or Clarice Starling, depending on the film, reluctantly accepts help from the infamous incarcerated forensic psychiatrist and actual cannibal himself, Hannibal Lecter, or at least that's what Manhunter and The Silence of the Lambs and Red Dragon are about. Hannibal and Hannibal Rising bring the character to the forefront, for better or worse, I think. Is it for better or worse? You tell me.
Worse.
Oh, okay. The series, or at least 1991's The Silence of the Lambs, is one of the bigger imprints on pop culture we'll have covered on the podcast, with Sir Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Hannibal Lecter in the middle three films, though again, mainly just in the first of the middle three films. Considered to be one of the greatest acting performances of all time, of one of the most iconic villains and characters of all time. In 2003, Lecter, as portrayed by Hopkins, was named the greatest villain in American cinema by the American Film Institute. So we're dealing with some pretty heavy hitting pop culture.
Probably you're probably going to want to say this when we get to Silence of the Lambs, but yeah, the one Best Picture at the Oscars, and
it's my next talking point. You have an uncanny ability to do that. It's like we should share these docs so that you can just say the next bit, and it'll be this like synchronized presentation.
Are you going to ask me how many films have won Best Picture that we've covered?
Well, that's not exactly what I've written down, but how many films have we covered?
Is it? I was thinking about this. Is it 5?
I didn't look it up. You'll have to tell me.
Rocky, both Godfathers, Return of the King, and this.
That might be true. Yeah, I can't imagine we've covered very many Oscar films on this podcast.
I don't know. I feel like we've had a few nominees we've mentioned.
Maybe.
But yeah, it's very uncommon for a part of a franchise to win.
Yes. Well, The Silence of the Lambs, of course, also is one of only 3 films to ever win the Big 5 Academy Awards, taking out Best Picture, Best Director for Jonathan Demme, Best Lead Actor for Anthony Hopkins, Best Lead Actress for Jodie Foster, and Best Screenplay, either original or adapted in this case, and the other 2 cases adapted, so no one's got the Big 5 with original screenplay.
Yeah, the one of the biggest sort of sweeps we've seen, though, obviously Everything Everywhere All at Once, which won picture, writing, original, directing, and 3 acting awards. Nothing's ever won that.
I'd say that's better.
Yeah, nothing's ever won that run of awards, but I think it's the 3rd or 4th film to win 3 acting awards. Nothing's ever won all 4, and the thing I find most interesting is that one of the other films that won 3 acting awards was Streetcar Named Desire, and the only person who didn't win for that film was Marlon Brando, lost Best Actor. And it's like, you study acting, that is the performance that invented good acting. Before that, it was the, how do you do, missy? And then...
It was sort of like how Hannibal Lecter talks when he's trying to be presentable.
Yeah. And then this one, and then his performance was like this super naturalistic... There's a moment in Streetcar Named Desire where they're walking through the park together, and the actress he's talking with is playing. She drops one of her gloves, and he just picks it up and he starts like pulling the fingers of it back out, like that they were inverted, and you can see her panic because he's not supposed to pick it up, or she wasn't supposed to drop it. She doesn't know what to do, but he is just so deep in that character. He can just, and it's like it's you can see the moment in history where acting was invented.
Yeah. So for those wondering, the other 2 films to have won the Big 5 were It Happened One Night in 1934 and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 1975. So 1934, 1975, 1991, they're pretty far apart. We're about due another one coming up, surely. Coincidentally, though, and this might be a qualifier for the next film to win the Big 5, all 3 films have a moment where a character instructs another character to put or throw something, quote, in the basket. apparently is in all three films.
Wow.
So the Silence of the Lambs' impact on popular culture is indelible, though someone should tell that to the very delible sequels. But before we get to those sequels, Richard, we do have to talk about this other thing that's not Silence of the Lambs, which is Manhunter. The original Hannibal Lecter film came out in 1986. It was directed by Michael Mann, and what do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I'm going to say 70.
It's got 93%.
Oh, wow.
Very, very well-respected film.
Yeah, I'd heard it was a unappreciated in its time kind of thing. So.
Yeah. It's one of these things where it's like, well, it was made before the invention of Rotten Tomatoes, so by the time it's been
but at the same
culturally
time,
reevaluated.
But Rotten Tomatoes takes contemporary reviews.
I think it has a lower audience score, but a higher critic score, so that could account for that.
What is it about?
Manhunter about?
So there's this fucking freaky ass dude running around town named the Tooth Fairy. And I'm not talking about Dwayne The Rock Johnson with Madison Pettis from American Pie Girls Rules. I'm talking about this Dollarhide.
Francis Dollarhide.
Yeah, who's a serial killer, and it's a fairly straightforward detective movie in that kind of sense that it's gathering clues and evidence to track this guy down. But he does, Will Graham, who's the detective, has to get assistance from this guy, Hannibal Lecter, who he has gone toe-to-toe with in the past and barely made it out alive.
Yes. Yeah. So the Tooth Fairy, or Red Dragon as he'd prefer to be called, because he buys into this like spirituality of the Red Dragon myth. He is basically going around murdering entire families because he's got like a hair lip, so he thinks he's like this disfigured monster, and he wants to like force people to make him feel love, so he's killing a bunch of people. And Will Graham he left it all behind after Hannibal Lecter nearly killed him when he arrested him, but he's approached by Jack Crawford and asked to just do one last case, because no one can do it like Will Graham. No one is able to step into the mind of a killer like Will Graham. No one is able, Richard, to hunt men like Will Graham is. Manhunter.
Will Graham, find his man.
Yes, so the film stars Tom Noonan as Francis Dollarhide. You've also got
I
Brian
knew a guy
Cox
called Tim Noonan.
So did I. I bet it was the same guy, and we've just never discussed that. We
Really?
Don't know him before. Totally.
How do you know Tim Noonan?
Went to my intermediate.
Went to my... Yeah, because he was the year below me.
Yeah,
in high school.
yeah.
And
What a beautiful moment. We both know this guy.
Tim Noonan was great. Yeah, we became real good buddies. We were in a few plays together. He's a good dude. And his older brother was cool as well.
If you're listening to this, Tim, you and I were once at someone's birthday party, and to this day, I think you made me laugh the hardest I've ever laughed in my life.
Wow.
I can't even remember what he said, but I was like nearly like incapacitated because I couldn't breathe from laughing.
Yeah, he's
Tim
a
Noonan,
funny guy, man.
Well, he was when he was 12. Maybe
or when he was like
maybe
16.
He's not there. So Brian Cox as Hannibal Lecter, Dennis Farina as Jack Crawford, Joan Allen as Reba, an unrecognizable Stephen Lang as Freddie Lowndes. I could not believe it was Stephen Lang. The bad guy from Avatar is this like Raggedy Andy looking motherfucker in this movie.
His skin's not even
so
blue.
Different. And of course, William Peterson plays Will Graham. And do you know who that is? He went on to play Gil Grissom in CSI.
Yeah,
that's Grissom.
I don't know anything about CSI, so.
I was so shocked. I found that out this afternoon when I was looking it up, because this film is a very influential cult film and is said to have influenced things like CSI and sort of like was one of the first instances of forensic science being displayed on screen in a film. So what did you think of Manhunter, Richard?
I just want to quickly look up who this
should quickly look up Tim Noonan.
Well, I was trying to find Tim Noonan's. I found his brother.
Yeah.
But what if there is no more Tim Noonan?
What, like he died?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to say that. But he doesn't even use social media by the looks of it.
Oh, maybe he's off the grid.
Damn, he would too. Fuck, he's cool.
That's classic Noons.
That's really funny. That's never come up before. Gil Grissom. All right, let's look at this guy. Yeah, nah. Sorry, I don't know CSI.
I don't know
like,
her
at all.
I know very little, but that's one. Of
Well,
the
no, I mean
things
you're the expert.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So this movie was cool. I think.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm going to come right out and say it. I've been very distracted all week, and my comprehension of these films isn't going to be as high as it normally is. My review for
you did a good rundown of what it's about just before, so at least you're comprehending a little bit.
Thank you for that. It's because I saw it twice, like because it's also the plot of Red Dragon. But my review. I remember my review for after I saw Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. People asked me what I thought of it. My review was, it's a good movie, but I was so tired and grumpy the whole time. I didn't enjoy it. And I think I've been tired and grumpy all week. And
I mean, most of these movies are bad. There's only really 2 that you needed to feel good about.
Yeah, I guess that's a fair point. But I think that, like, there's such a pressure on this episode.
Yeah, right. It's a blockbuster franchise. The Discord's been ablaze with conversation about what our conversation would be.
Well, people have said, I've never been more excited for an episode. Like, we just dropped you guys a day plus long Scooby-Doo episode. And you wanted this more than that. And it's like, I know there's a TV show as well, and the TV show's Brian Fuller, that's his name, right? Yeah. That great showrunner, and so I can understand why people are obsessed with the TV show, but I didn't get that from the movies,
right?
Which I'm sure will be a recurring motif that I don't get what you'll see. Yeah, I don't get
a recurring
what you see
motif. Yeah. Well, no, I get it, man. I think that when you're in a bad mood, watching a good movie can be exhausting. Whereas when you're in a bad mood, watching a bad movie, it flows through you, and you're like, in some ways, this means more to me than any good movie ever could.
Yeah. Was that a Hannibal reference?
No, not at all. It was just straight off the top of my little dome. I knew next to nothing about Manhunter. It was one of those things where it was like, did you know there's a Hannibal Lecter movie that was made before Silence of the Lambs?
I think, I knew that much. I knew that there was like, there's this franchise where, Anthony Hopkins plays him in, 3 movies, and then I knew there's a prequel, but I always knew somewhere in the back of my mind, there's a secret first film. Yeah.
Yeah, I probably read it on cracked.com in 2010. Or like
6 movies you can't believe had prequels.
I knew it was based on Red Dragon, and I knew it was directed by Michael Mann. Didn't know anything else.
I didn't know it was Michael Mann until I watched the film.
Right. I'm not even that familiar with Michael Mann, to be honest. But I watched this movie. I went to bed. It was about midnight. I chucked it on my laptop. I curled up in bed, and I was like, I'll start it now, and maybe I can finish it tomorrow, because I was a bit behind when I needed to have watched it by. And Richard, I was just absolutely transfixed by it. I watched the whole thing through. It reminded me of being lost in a really good book, which is a feeling I haven't had for years, because I can't read.
I think, surely it's more like being lost in a really good movie.
I don't know how to explain it. It was this like
I mean, I'm familiar with getting lost in a good movie as a concept. You didn't need to make an analogy to something.
No, it's different, because this was like, I should be turning this off and going to sleep and finishing it tomorrow. But it was like I was under the covers with a flashlight reading this gripping novel. Like I was so drawn to it that going to bed at a reasonable time, be damned, I have to finish the story. I absolutely adored this, dude. I think this is the most I've enjoyed a film that I haven't seen before for the podcast in years.
Wow.
I'm trying to think. The big ones that come up whenever I'm like, what are some of my favorite films that I discovered through film franchise?
God's Not Dead or Light and Darkness. God's Not Dead, We the People.
Scream 1 and 2 and Nymphomaniac Part 1 or Volume 1 are the three that I always think of are like, these are ones I discovered through the podcast that I just absolutely adored. The last film we watched for film franchise Fortnights, which I hadn't seen before, which I gave 5 stars to, was the original Planet of the Apes, and before that, The Godfather Part 2. So that's how far back, if you look at the timeline of the podcast, that I've, since I've felt like a 5-star hit me. I loved it. I thought the trancey noir 80s soundtrack.
There's such a specific look and sound to it, and it is very 80s. But also, I'm to understand that it's a very Michael Mann, and
that's
it has the vibe of the 24-hour movie marathon that I go to each year. That they play movies that feel like this every year.
Yes, I get that. I totally hear you. I loved it. I thought the fact that it was. Did you watch? I downloaded the director's cut of this, which meant there were random scenes and sometimes random shots that were just done with unprocessed film. So it just suddenly dropped quality. The lighting went all weird. Just sometimes it would just be like someone turning their head, but it just felt so authentic and real because of that. I was just blown away by it.
I absolutely did not watch the director's cut. I'm kind of against director's cuts.
Well, in this case, he said it wasn't really a director's cut because no one was fighting him. It was just like he re-edited it after it all.
Yeah, I think that a director's cut needs like a specific. It needs to be like a flop. There's well documented studio interference. Any movies where it's just the director shot a bunch of stuff and loved it and wanted to keep it in the film, generally those are bad.
Fair enough. Well, I didn't think this version was, although again he said it's technically not really a director's cut. I thought there was this ethereal like spirituality to this film, and a lot of that's the like Red Dragon mysticism there, and just I guess noir having like slight like sort of samurai influences as well, like these things like seep into the film. There's a scene where Dollarhide, who's the serial killer, he falls in love with a blind woman who works at the photo processing place that they work at. Her name's Reba, and they start dating, and he takes her to a zoo vet where they've sedated a tiger, and it's a real tiger, and he helps Reba, who's blind, like pat this tiger, and I thought it was so beautiful. I nearly started crying. Like I was just completely lost, and the way it was filmed was so warm and gorgeous, and this vibe to it that just felt so beautiful and important and dark and sad.
I do have to ask if that came from. Did you find the tiger sexy?
Sorry, I thought that was implied. The tiger was very sexy, and that's why I was so into it. Sorry, I should have said that at the start. The reason I liked this movie was so much was because of the sexy tiger, the insatiably sexy tiger. I thought Tom Noonan was impeccable as Dollarhide. He's so creepy. There's a bit where he kidnaps Freddie Lowndes, Stephen Lang's character, who's a like a creepy gossip journalist for the local paper, and he's like tied him up, and he's showing him like a 1986 version of a PowerPoint presentation of like I guess a slideshow of like all the the Red Dragon mythos, and he's like and then he goes, "Do you see? Da 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 da. Do you see?" And that's something that I'd seen parodied on South Park 15 years ago, and was like, this is clearly a reference to something I haven't seen, and it's fucking Manhunter that it's a reference to. It was great. I just thought he looks so creepy in it, and he plays such this like quiet, sensitive, scary person. I thought he was. What do you think of old Tom Noonan? Do you like Tom Noonan?
He's no Tim Noonan.
No, he's no Tim Noonan. I just want to make it clear.
Good cast on this one.
What do you think of
Brian Cox as Hannibal?
Brian Cox as Hannibal?
Yeah, it's I haven't. I think I watched the first couple episodes of Hannibal, the TV series, but which is obviously a very different Hannibal to Anthony Hopkins. Whereas Brian Cox is like, if you didn't have your glasses on, you could probably think it's Anthony Hopkins, you know?
a younger Anthony Hopkins, yeah.
Yeah. But it is interesting, that there's like seeing, and then especially there's like a lot of scenes that you see the exact same script used by Anthony Hopkins in Red Dragon. And yeah, it's one of those things that it's, I enjoy, his performance is good enough, like, for what is such a minor part of the film. And it's, his part's beefed up a bit in Red Dragon. I don't know if that's like how that compares to the source material, but I'm assuming it's because it's Anthony Hopkins.
It's because it is. It's basically the writer of Red Dragon, the third Hopkins movie, like referred to it as like a commercial necessity to beef up the Hannibal role in it. Yeah. I think like it's not as creepy as Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah,
it's more of like a dignified, sort of like is like Brian Cox is someone I've only really just become aware of his existence because
he was
he's such a meme from
Samurai.
From the Samurai.
The Scooby-Doo.
Oh, it's the Scooby-Doo movie. Yeah. No, from Succession, a show I'm not watching.
I was going to say.
I see like clips of him all the time saying fuck off and stuff. So like seeing him in this, and he's just sort of this very calm and very like, I feel like the Anthony Hopkins version has way more depth to him. This felt closer to like caricature, but also more realistic at the same time. Like he's not trying to be scary. I don't think the Brian Cox version. That's a good way of putting it. This is the only Hannibal movie where his surname is spelt Lector for some reason. There's no K in the books or in the Hopkins versions. In all other adaptations of the novels, it's spelled that way, and he is not in this film. He's not in this film explicitly said to be a cannibal, I think. I don't recall it. He's called us. I might be wrong, and there are a lot of Hannibal
his name's fucking Hannibal.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that I reckon that's what gives this film the edge over Silence of the Lambs to me, is you don't have these deadly serious crime films with maybe the silliest, most juvenile pun at the center of it, you know? Like this
like
movie...
Boy is Thomas Harris lucky, is his name, right? Boy is he fucking lucky that Hannibal is actually a name.
Yeah, exactly. This movie, Manhunter, has zero sense of humor. It is not a fun. There is not a single joke in this film. Imagine if Hannibal was a cannibal. You'd be like, what the hell is going on? I'm losing my mind. According to an interview with Brian Cox, the following actors were considered for the role of Hannibal Lecter in this one. Brian Dennehy, who we've seen in Rambo.
He was referenced in South Park.
He's referenced another South Park reference. Bruce Dern, a 1986 Bruce Dern was considered. John Lithgow, who would later in the TV show Dexter prove that he can play that sort of character, and Mandy Patinkin nearly played the role, apparently.
I can see. I think John Lithgow would have been too young at the time, but
he was apparently second choice. He's gone on to say for both Brian Cox and Anthony Hopkins, he was like next in line, apparently. Yeah. During the filming of this movie, Anthony Hopkins was playing King Lear at the National Theatre, and during the filming of Silence of the Lambs, Brian Cox was playing King Lear at the National Theatre. They switched roles. Isn't that serendipitous?
Wow, that is. That's like how...
that's serendipity do, bro.
Yeah, it's the National... I think it was National Theatre. The production of Frankenstein, which was Benedict Cumberbatch and the other guy whose name I can't remember, swapping each night playing Frankenstein and Frankenstein's monster. But the other guy whose name I've forgotten plays Sherlock on Elementary. And this was like years before either of them were cast as Sherlock.
Nice. Let's talk about titles. We could do a whole section of it, but I want to talk about it here because here is where it's going to be the most relevant to talk about the title of these films, because this is obviously based on the novel Red Dragon, and this film does feel like it could be called Red Dragon. I thought watching it, I was like, it's so interesting they gave this such a generic,
They should have called it the
Manhunterism.
Tooth Fairy.
Yeah, they should have called it the Tooth Fairy, starring Dwayne The Rock Johnson.
And Madison Pettis.
The Peterson. This movie was originally going to be titled Red Dragon. However, when Year of the Dragon, 1985, became a box office failure, executive producer and name who will probably appear a few times in this podcast, Dino De Laurentiis, decided to avoid a dragon in the title. Didn't think it would sell well. It's that whole, movies with dragon in the title don't sell well kind of, these weird lessons Hollywood learns from things. In May 1991, NBC decided to capitalize off Silence of the Lambs by airing this film under the title Red Dragon, The Curse of Hannibal Lecter. So you could call this film that instead.
Yeah.
The Curse of... It's got nothing to do with Hannibal.
I wonder if there's an IMDb trivia in this film as an adaptation of the novel Red Dragon. Brian Cox would later go on to play a dragon.
Yes.
In Scooby-Doo, the
Sword of the Samurai or something.
Scooby.
William Peterson, Gil Grissom himself, also said that another reason for the change was because people thought it sounded like a martial arts film, and with Bruce Lee knocking out dragon movies at the time, he said, and Dino in his wisdom decided people would think it was a kung fu movie. However, Brian Cox, who would one day play a dragon in Scooby-Doo, the Sword of the Samurai, stated that he expressed disdain for the film's title, calling it bland and cheesy. Which I think
saying,
is a
I
fair
love dragons and I wish to
I
one
would
day
love
play
to play one.
Yeah.
We often scour IMDb trivia for
Scooby-Doo and the
poorly
Samurai
written...
Sword was the movie. Just so we've got the title right.
We often scour our IMDb trivia to look for the most poorly written and silly things being put on there. Here's some pieces of dumb IMDb trivia for you, Richard. This is the only known adaptation of Thomas Harris's Hannibal books where Hannibal is never seen out of his prison cell. This is the only known adaptation of it?
Wow.
What? There could be others.
There could be countless adaptations.
They're just made in people's basements. They didn't, they read the book. I was like, I got to film this, but I can't make any money off it.
Yeah,
right.
I like to imagine a lot of these that there's two people writing it, and they go oh, what? They're watching it, and they go, this is actually the only one that shows them only in his. And I go, that we know of.
That we know of. Yeah. Another piece of IMDb trivia. At around an hour, 13 minutes, the elevator light in the background comes on at the moment that Hannibal tells Graham, quote, if one does what God does enough times, one will become as God is. This was something that director Michael Mann arranged with his crew to symbolize Graham's revelation. So I think it's a great line, and it's awesome. He's listening to him on the phone, and he says that, and then the elevator light comes almost like a light bulb moment.
Yeah.
But it's just the fact that this is a piece of trivia, and it's that's what filmmaking is, IMDb user.
Yeah, they actually planned to do that.
And finally, another piece of trivia in the IMDb trivia section for Manhunter refers to the director as Mucal Man. The rest of it wasn't dumb, but it says nice. Mucal Man.
What a crappy superhero. One thought on Manhunter that's relevant sort of to the wider discussion, that there's a scene in this, my favorite scene in this movie, my favorite scene in Red Dragon, is when Hannibal Lecter is trying to get Will Graham's home address, and he calls up this university and is like, hi there, my name's so-and-so from this courier. Bob Greer from this courier, and he's like, I've got this package, but I don't have the address, and he's calling, he's like, can you just pop into the office and just, that'll be in the Rolodex there, and they're like, oh, sorry, I can't go in his office, and it's like, oh, sorry, I need to get this on the courier truck post haste, which is the name of a courier in New Zealand. And
my dad used to work for them.
Oh, we're just learning so much about each other today.
I know, this is so beautiful.
Stuff that I can't believe didn't come up earlier in our friendship. But yeah, and so it convinces this woman on the phone. I think Brian Cox does that scene better than Anthony Hopkins.
Yeah, I agree. He's like, well, zip your little digit down to G.
Yeah.
Just looking through the alphabet. Yeah. And he, of course, does that because he's communicating with Dollarhide, and he manages to tell Dollarhide Will Graham's family home, and they have to race. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. We do a little segment that we sometimes forget to do on this show, Richard, and it's going to be fucking useless for the Hannibal Lecter episode. But we like to ask French whys. Why was this film good enough to warrant going further? And it's maybe something we should probably do after Silence of the Lambs instead of after Manhunter. But the answer is it's this weird concoction of like, well, this one did well, and there's another book, and then they did the other book, and they were like, well, the movie did well, so let's get the author to write another novel, and it switched back and forth, and much to the entire franchise's detriment, I think. But yeah, we are moving on now to the crown jewel in this franchise's in its crown, which is The Silence of the Lambs. Came out in 1991, directed by a guy named Jonathan. 91. Directed by Jonathan Demme. Is it Demme? Would you say Demme?
Yeah, I'd say Demme.
Demi Moore? Directed by Demi Moore? What does it have on Rotten Tomatoes? So Manhunter had 93%. What does Silence of the Lambs have?
Silence of the Lambs, I'm going to say, has 98%.
95%.
Oof.
That fucking 5%. One of them was Gene Siskel. Fucking hated this movie.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yes, he went on and on about how much he hated it, and Roger Ebert was like, this movie's great. And then, like, you know, as its legacy became what it was, he's like, but you feel fucking stupid about that, Siskel, huh?
That's great.
Yeah, what is Silence of the... Oh, yeah, what is it about? What's Silence of the Lambs about?
So Silence of the Lambs is about a young FBI woman. That's right, I said woman.
Agentess.
Agentrix, who called Clarice Starling, who is similar to Manhunter. She's on the case. She is hunting down a killer known as Buffalo Bill, who kidnaps women, skins them alive, or skins them, and detective film, she's chasing him down. But she seeks the advice of Hannibal Lecter, this time played by Anthony Hopkins.
Oh!
And he sort of takes a liking to her. They have this weird pseudo-sexual relationship.
A rapport.
Yeah, but a rapport, and there's like this will they, won't they element to it.
I don't know if it's more, I don't know if sexual is the right word, but it's like a fixation.
Yeah. Well, it's like you with dolphins, where it's like, yeah, it is a little bit sexual.
I think it becomes that in the sequels I'm choosing to ignore the canon of. I think there's more of a
I think fixation's a good way of putting it, yeah.
Respect in this.
Well, yeah. I also think that it's like, I mean, obviously the whole point of Hannibal Lecter is that he gets inside your head. And Clarice he's getting inside her head more than she would probably care to admit. And I think that he's not getting in as far as he would like to.
So it's an Edward Cullen Bella Swan situation.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so she helps, Hannibal Lecter sort of gives her the clues
and
to
ends up
help
escaping
her.
from prison as well. At the end.
Ends up escaping, yep. So while some Oscar stats will proudly tout this film as one of only 3 sequels to ever win Best Picture, the other 2 being Godfather Part 2 and Lord of the Rings Return of the King, I would regard The Silence of the Lambs as obviously a new continuity.
Yeah.
And not just because the returning characters are completely recast, and not just because they made another adaptation of Red Dragon as a prequel, and not just because, Richard, the rich tone and style of Manhunter is completely absent here, but because the surname is spelt different. That's why this is officially not a sequel.
Wow, that's great.
So
you talk about the rich sort of visual style. Silence of the Lambs, watching it, I mean, I've seen this movie a few times, but watching it this time, I was really aware of the very sort of distinct directorial style of it, because I'd always, I knew it won the Big Five, and with the Oscars, a lot of the times, best director can just go to, no one's going to just complain if it goes to just the best film of the year, you know? But then when you have ones that it's like, okay, yeah, that one actually had a really clear directorial voice, but it maybe wasn't the best film. And yeah, this one, like, yeah, watching it again, it's like, it actually does have this really clear directorial voice, and particularly in how it plays with eye lines.
Yeah, totally.
There's a million video essays about this, I'm sure, but it's like that first meeting of Hannibal and Clarice. When you're shooting a scene, you have two characters looking at each other, and you put the camera anywhere on one side of the line, so over the shoulder, so that it gives the illusion that one character is looking right to left and the other character is looking left to right, or vice versa. But there's a certain moment the camera gets closer and closer so that the eye lines are just barely off camera, and then at the moments where it like really, oh, he's got her, he starts directly addressing the camera, and it's most notable in that scene. But it's people talking directly to the camera as if you're the point of view of the character listening to them is used like quite a lot throughout the film. It's really interesting.
So whenever there's a conversation with Clarice, the way it's framed is she'll be to the side of the frame, talking into the negative space to the side of the shot, and then the reverse shot will be someone facing directly into the camera, replying to her.
Yeah.
And there's this whole thing about like Clarice is this small fish in the big pond that is the FBI. It emphasizes the fact that she's a woman in a male-dominated field quite a lot, and we'll talk about it soon, but there is a lot about sort of gender in this.
Yeah. So. Also, the whole thing about playing with eye lines and why that's sort of impressive as a director is that is, I feel like
it looks like you've fucked it up if you get it wrong.
That's the thing. Yeah. That it's like it's one of the most intriguing things to play with, but it's also like one of the hardest and fastest rules of filmmaking is like the shots will not make sense, especially if you've got more than two characters. But if you've got only two characters, you can play with it quite a bit if you've got wide shots to establish where they are in relation to each other. But if you've got multiple characters, you completely lose the ability to see who is talking to who. And it's something we've seen in more sort of amateur-y films that they just focus on this person is talking, so here's a shot of them, and it's like, well, okay, if they're addressing this person to the right, but in the wide shot that person's on the left of them, and it's so easy to fuck up. But yeah, it's a bold choice and one that's very easy to fuck up. So nailing it, I think, is like actually the sign of a good director.
Yeah, I agree. Well, speaking of directors, Richard, it wasn't always Jonathan Demme on board. One Gene Hackman originally bought the rights to the novel back in the 80s and planned to direct and potentially play Hannibal, or he was actually he was going to play Hannibal, then was going to be like, no, I'll be Jack Crawford, before he like
Clarice's boss.
So, yeah. There was some other film that Gene Hackman was in where he was like a violent character, and afterwards Gene Hackman was like, I don't want to play violent
Mississippi
characters
Burning.
anymore. Something like that, yeah. And so he lost interest midway through the script being written by the Tal Talley or something. Who wrote the screenplay? Ted Talley. And basically someone else was like, no, don't stop writing this. The novel is so good. Apparently Jodie Foster already had her clause in the book, like wanting... And I didn't know this. Do you know Jodie Foster already won an Oscar by this point? Clarice was her second Oscar.
Oh, wow. She was nominated for Taxi Driver.
But she won for The Accused in 1989.
Oh, yes.
So Silence of the Lambs, her second Oscar. That's crazy. I think that's crazy. So everyone, this is in the behind the scenes of Hollywood, everyone is like, we got to get on the Silence of the Lambs adaptation train. Like, have you read the book? Like that's the vibe. And then Orion picked up the funding. They got Jonathan Demme on board, who was offered the chance to direct. He read the novel and was like, of course, I'll direct it, because everyone thought this was going to be a hit. And Richard, I don't want to spoil the ending for you, but they catch Buffalo Bill and Hannibal gets away. And they were right, it was a hit. Everyone loved Silence of the Lambs. But did you love it? Did you love Silence of the Lambs, Richard? You said you'd seen it before. What are your thoughts? Is this a 5-star film?
Other times I'd seen it, loved it. 5 stars. This time I was just so tired and so grumpy. I gave it 4.5 stars.
Wow. So bloody counting the bloody lambs falling asleep.
Yeah.
Don't be too silent, you lambs. I won't be able to.
I'll fall bloody right asleep
I'll
in your wool.
fall bloody asleep. Yeah. I've always loved this film.
Yeah, I do think it's
a
a fantastic film.
I actually think I love it a little bit more than you do. I think it balances the theatricality of Lecter with the groundedness of everything else in the story. Like a movie with these serial killers in it should be fucking ridiculous, but it's like real life. Like it's just a serious film, and it's just these like powerhouse performances dropped in the middle of it. I do think Manhunter is slightly better. Well, Manhunter's more catered to my specific tastes, I think.
Sure.
And there's a whole cast of it's not just Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster in this. You've got Ted Levine as Buffalo Bill / James Gum. Give me your best Buffalo Bill impression. How's your Buffalo Bill?
Give me a line.
It puts the lotion on its skin.
Yeah, I love it. I love like Ted
Give me
Levine.
yours. I know you want to do it.
You've got to suck your larynx shut, or your esophagus shut. Sort of. So I can go like,
Richard, fuck me. I'd fuck me. I'd fuck me so hard.
Yeah.
You got to like really like clasp your entire throat area shut to get the.
So that was 2 points. So that's enough to now give us your Hannibal Lecter impression.
Okay. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. That's how like that's if you're parodying Hannibal Lecter.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
That's much better. You're
okay,
much
so now
more
that's
Hannibal guy.
That's 2 points split between us as well. And now give us your best Clarice Starling impression.
Okay. Dr. Lecter. I thought that was pretty good.
The one that I kept on that got stuck in my head that I kept saying is when she walks in and someone says something to her, and Hannibal says, "What did he say to you?" And she goes, "He said I can smell your cunt."
It's so silly, man. It's so great though. It's such a scary scene.
I thought I've done it better than that. I can smell your cunt. You gotta change your life. That was Dr. Phil.
I myself cannot. That's a borderline smooth line.
Yeah. Don't worry, girl. It ain't Sting.
No, because he's kind of like he's being polite by saying he can't, but he's still acknowledging her cunt. So
yeah. It's like he's being polite by saying, but it's like I could if I wanted to. The power is still in his hands.
Wow. You messaged me while you were watching this and you said, "How is this so long? I only remember like 2 scenes from it." And I agree. I remember the start, maybe the first 20 minutes, and then the very ending. And then it's like, there's a whole hour 45 in the middle there. And it's not like it's bad. It's just like rewatching this for the first time, maybe like 10 years or the other day. It's like, I don't remember the scene where Clarice gets a tip from Hannibal and goes to a storage garage and struggles to open the door and finds a head inside. Like,
yeah, there's like the other movie that I feel this with, and this is like, even if you'd asked me this before the last 2 weeks, I would have said this, but like the other one is what's called different things in different countries, but The Wrong Man or Lucky Number 7. I've seen that movie like half a dozen times. I don't know how it's more than like 20 minutes long. Like, I don't remember 90% of that movie. And same with this. And it's not even that I watch it and I go, oh yeah, it has this scene in it. Even when I'm watching it, I'm like, why is it not fit? Like, what is there still to go? I don't remember. And even like now, having watched it a few days ago, I still only remember it being about 30 minutes.
Did you know, Richard, that even though Manhunter is not in the same continuity as this, that 2 actors return?
Wow.
To the franchise, playing different characters, and in fact one of these 2 actors reprises the role in Hannibal and Red Dragon as well. Do you know who they are?
Anthony Hopkins and Jodie Foster.
No. Incorrect. No, the Frankie Faison, who plays Lieutenant Fisk and Manhunter, and he plays Barney, the like guy that works at the prison in this, and he's in the sequels as well. And Dan Butler played an FBI fingerprint expert in Manhunter and is an entomologist in this movie. So there was obviously some kind of like, you know, a working knowledge of the canon of Hannibal adaptations, I guess. But
yeah.
Do you want to know who was supposedly in line to play Hannibal Lecter?
John Lithgow.
Anthony, correct. We've also got John Hurt, Christopher Lloyd, Dustin Hoffman, Patrick Stewart, Louis Gossett Jr., Robert Duvall, Jack Nicholson, and Robert De Niro. These were all considered for the role of Hannibal Lecter.
Do you want to do any impressions as them?
Well, Jeremy Irons is the next one, which feels like the most impressionable.
More impressionable than Jack Nicholson and Robert De Niro.
I think so.
I have a cunt, Clarice. Can you smell me?
I'm gone. I'm in orbit. My sides are in orbit. I've got a... What's Jack Nicholson? I've got a cunt. it's for some reason...
I can't smell your cunt, Clarice.
Patrick Stewart, that should be an easy one. I can't. I get so nervous whenever I step up to the plate to do an impression.
In front of me as well.
Make it so. Make it smell your cunt. Why is that the line I'm focusing on?
He doesn't even say it.
He doesn't even say it.
Yeah.
Jeremy Irons was asked but turned down the role because he didn't want to play another dark character after his character in Reversal of Fortune. In a 2016 interview with Empire, John Lithgow said that Hopkins Lecter was one of the great screen villains of all time, adding, even though I was next in line for the role.
Yeah, I feel like when you see that, you're like, you can't look at that and be like, I would have done that better.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, Richard, we've been talking a lot about saying a pretty nasty word a lot on this episode. One that some people might consider a little uncouth, but not in New Zealand, though. You can say this on primetime TV, and you can't. But we're getting there. But,
4 more
Richard,
years.
there are some other things that are potentially offensive in this film that we, as stewards of the franchise, as stewards of pop culture, need to talk about. So put on your 3D glasses, because we're going to sit in the theater and have an interactive 4D experience with the problematic corner.
Ooh, I bet this didn't age well. Let's get a laugh at someone else's expense. I have to warn you, this might get obscene. This the problematic corner where ain't nothing PC.
It's impossible to talk about this movie without discussing sort of like maybe ever so slightly dated ideas around gender, specifically transgender stuff, a word they do not use in this. They use more antiquated terms, mainly because Buffalo Bill's whole deal is that he wants to be a woman, so he's kidnapping women and making a suit out of their skin so that he can be a woman. And I think when you remember this movie with 2020 vision, 2020's vision,
you forget all those scenes.
Well, you don't think about it. You're not going like, you're thinking about the enigmatic performances and things, but it does have kind of this like, I don't know if this is saying anything good. But what I never remember though is that they go out of their way in this film to be like, Buffalo Bill is not a real trans person, which sounds in a lot of ways like it could be more offensive. But there's this whole thing they mention about like how he applied for reassignment surgery and they said, no, you're too violent, and apparently it's more pronounced in the novel. Like they get like a medical doctor's opinion who is like, no, trans people aren't actually, he is not representative of trans people. In fact, he is not a trans person. And it kind of feels like it's this weird way where it's kind of like they're future-proofing what people were going to be saying about it, when they wouldn't have had to at the time without getting in trouble, I mean. And, like, I don't know if I buy it. It's kind of weird to just be like, no, he's not a real trans person.
Yeah.
Because
it is like, so the movie says he's not trans, but that... and we're using he, him pronouns as well because of that. But I did a little bit of digging, and correct me if I'm wrong, anyone listening to this, but as far as I can tell, this is the closest we have to a trans character in a film that's won Best Picture.
Wow. Like a trans main character, I guess? There's got to be like...
No, like I was...
Surely someone pops up in like Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Apparently not.
Wow, that's strange. Well, I mean, times are changing.
I would say within the next probably 3 years, we're going to have a film centered around a trans person, or significantly featuring in a supporting role. I'm surprised it hasn't come up as a major issue yet. That the Academy's having to be like, oh, we nominate based on the gender you.
Signed with
express yourself as, or in the case of someone non-binary, that they say choose a category.
I've heard with non-binary the thinking is you go actor because that's the general. You go best actor because that's the general term. Yeah. But I could be wrong, and as always, please correct me because my heart feels like it's in the right place, even if I say something maybe that doesn't sound quite right. And on that, I feel like there's maybe more we could talk about with this.
Well, it's not.
Well, it's just because, like, there should be a trans person in this conversation, having this conversation with us, and not, like, us deciding whether something's okay or not. This is all just sort of to bring up the fact that it's a contentious issue.
And people are going to think it's weird if we don't bring it up as well.
And I guess so, but it's like, some people think that Silence of the Lambs is actually, like, going out of its way to be in the right place. Some people think it's not, and this is the kind of thing that we feel we need to bring up when talking about these movies. Yeah. So, moving out of Problematic Corner, Richard, a lot of hullabaloo is made out of the fact that Anthony Hopkins won the Oscar while barely being in the film. And this is something I remember my dad being like, Anthony Hopkins won Best Actor and he's only in Silence of the Lambs for 5 minutes. Which is like a bit of an exaggeration. To be more accurate, Hopkins has 24 minutes and 52 seconds of screen time. It's the second shortest to win an Academy Award for Best Actor in a leading role, behind David Niven in Separate Tables in 1958 with 23:39. However, in terms of percentage of runtime, Hopkins is the shortest, as he only appears in 21% of the film. But knowing this little bit of trivia about it, I've always felt like he's in it plenty. Like he's the main male character in the film. It doesn't feel like he's not in it that much.
Yeah, like, it's interesting, going into it knowing that. I'd always heard was 7 or 17 minutes, interestingly, but because I'd heard this piece of trivia, he's actually not really in the film. And yeah, it's interesting, like, the phases I've gone through of, like, what does that piece of trivia mean? Because initially it was like, oh, he's actually, like, it's crazy someone could win an Academy Award for barely being in a film. And then it's like, oh no, the point is that when you watch the film, you think he's in it a lot more than that. And then finding out, it's like, oh no, it's because it was Best Actor as opposed to Supporting Actor. And it's like, there's longer supporting actor performances than that.
I think that's a very simple way to look at what a supporting actor is.
Yeah, well, I think that
screen time. I don't know,
but it is just he probably had a better chance as lead actor that year. Like the distinction between lead and supporting is so nebulous. Like Waymond is clearly the lead male character in Everything Everywhere All at Once, but he was marketed as a supporting actor and he swept the supporting actor awards because it was a much less stacked category than lead actor that year, this year. But it's interesting. I guess what people are trying to get out of it more though is that it's like he feels like he's in the film more than that.
Yeah. And maybe that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Got a dumb piece of IMDb trivia for you for Silence of the Lambs. At around 18 minutes, Sir Anthony Hopkins improvised the fast slurping type sound that Hannibal Lecter does, the thing. He did it spontaneously during filming, and everyone thought it was great. Jonathan Demme became annoyed with it after a while, but denied his irritation. And fuck, that's so funny to me. Like, everyone being like, fuck, that's so cool, that thing that Hopkins is doing with his mouth. And Jonathan Demme, the director, just sitting in director's chair being like, yeah, it's cool that he made that decision for his character. Can we try one without it, Anthony? Can we try one where you don't do it? Richard, do you have anything else you want to say about Silence of the Lambs, or should we move out of the golden era of the Hannibal movies and into the worst film yet?
I do want to. I think that the title is worth mentioning because, it's
I've said it a couple of times.
Oh, sorry. Yep. No, it's an interesting title, and I remember asking my sister before I'd seen the movie, and she had seen it, what it meant, and it's like, it's because there's no it's one of these films that dances around a title bomb.
Yeah.
Which I know you love.
The title refers to Clarice shares a story with Hannibal that when she was a kid, she heard lambs being slaughtered at the farmhouse of her like uncle and auntie who picked her up after her father died. And she stole one of the lambs and tried to run away with it, but she didn't get very far. And the idea is that she got into the FBI to save people because the screaming of the lambs, haunts her every nightmare. And the idea being if she can save these women from being killed by Buffalo Bill, she will finally have the silence of the lambs.
Which is never said in the movie, but it is like...
Never said in the film, but it's like, are you hoping those lambs will stop screaming, Clarice?
Yeah.
Perhaps they would be silent, he says. No, it is cool, and I really like it. And I wish the other films and other stories... Red Dragon's a cool title, but I think Hannibal and Hannibal Rising should be...
stupid fucking titles, and we'll get to them now. Hannibal 2001. This film, like the title of this film, which is, like you said, is based on a book that was written because of the success of Silence of the Lambs. This franchise is the Lost World Jurassic Park, where it's Ian Malcolm dies in Jurassic Park, the book, but he was so popular they had to retcon that and be like, can you write a second book so we can adapt it into a second movie? And it's like, ditching all the fancy good titles and just being like, the guy you liked in the movie.
Yeah, he is front and center of it. And I think from a novel perspective, I kind of get it, because if you're Thomas Harris and you've written these two novels that just happen to share this same character, almost like the Medea films, Richard, where it's like they're just films that happen to share this character, I could see then doing like Thomas Harris not even thinking of this as a sequel and it's just a spin-off, know? I can see it in that way, it makes sense. But I do wish there was some more like idiosyncrasy between the titles. I think you could do something with pigs. Pigs play a massive role in this, and if you've done dragons and lambs...
Pigs can fly.
Pigs can fly. The squealing of the pigs. The wing of the pigs. Yeah, but on the title though, with this film, the Hannibal franchise, Richard, has this pretty interesting distinction of being a rare example of a series that is not most commonly referred to by the title of the original film. People don't call these the Silence of the Lambs movies, they call them the Hannibal movies. We've seen this before with like the Chronicles of Riddick is what people call that franchise. We haven't covered this yet, but the Dark Knight trilogy is what people call that franchise. I don't know if we've seen a franchise before which takes its name from the third film, though. I mean, I guess if it's kind of the second film, but...
You mentioned this in the Discord, that you were like, when have we ever seen a franchise that like this late in the game introduces the overarching title of it, and then someone was like, I can't remember who, sorry, but was like, the fourth Chucky film is the first one to have the word Chucky in the title. And it's like, that is a perfect answer.
Yeah. That's true. Although I did call that episode the Child's Play / Chucky franchise. So,
but
not for me, it isn't.
I would like, to a layman who only knows. I mean, it's similar to First Blood as well. Rambo. That's another one.
That's the second film. Though.
Yeah, that it's like you don't. Yeah, it's you learn later on that it's like, oh, the first one is called something completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, what did you think of Hannibal 2001, directed by Ridley Scott?
Yeah.
Buried that lead. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
30%.
39%. Woo!
Yeah,
We should do that every time there's a dramatic dip in a franchise quality.
we should just every Rotten Tomatoes, we should just do sound effects.
Yeah,
Every Rotten
yeah,
Tomatoes score.
yeah.
So I'll tell you what it was about first, then we can go to what I thought of it. So
Let's go.
this one, yeah, like you said, it's a lot more focused on Hannibal the Cannibal, and this time now Julianne Moore.
I only
is-
saw Manhunter. I didn't know. It's so obvious. His name's Hannibal.
That would be too silly, wouldn't it? Yeah, but he's now escaped, and the whole overarching plot of this movie is Clarice is now trying to get to Hannibal before Hannibal's lone surviving victim, Mason Verger, who ate his own face, Verger, who ate his own face at Hannibal's request, can find him and kill him. And now Verger's not a particularly good dude either. So he's Wikipedia describes him as a wealthy child molester, which is like, it implies he made his money molesting children.
Yeah,
which
yeah. or at least he molests so many children that his life is quite rich.
Yeah, what he lacks in money, he makes up for.
In molestation, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of this like ongoing cat and mouse thing, and people get ate.
Yeah. That's like one of the 5 things this movie is about.
Yeah.
I think. I think there are smatterings of good scenes in this film. There's one or two I really like. There's a whole storyline in it about a Italian FBI agent trying to turn, his name's Patsy, he's trying to turn in, he discovers who Hannibal is and tries to turn him into Verger to collect the $3 million reward, but Hannibal figures out what he's doing and he kills him. And I thought that scene was great. There's this bit where he's like, when he reveals that he knows, he's like, I'm putting very serious thought into eating your wife. And it's this kind of like, that was the clip that played in the TV commercials when this was on TV when I was a kid, and I really like that scene. I think that's really cool. But yeah, this is 5 films at once.
David Mamet wrote this?
David, isn't it crazy how much talent was involved in this film for it to turn out so poorly? So, directed by Ridley Scott, fresh off the set of Gladiator, written by, as you say, celebrated playwright David Mamet, scored by Hans Zimmer, who, there's nothing wrong with the music in this film.
Yeah.
Performances by Gary Oldman, Ray Liotta, and of course Hopkins returns to play Hannibal. But Jodie Foster opted not to return, and so Clarice is played by Julianne Moore. And I like Julianne Moore, but when your original film hinged on the success of 2 literally Oscar-winning performances playing off each other, I think that's the death knell for this film, is Julianne Moore taking over from Jodie Foster.
I know, AJ, you said something that threw me a little bit there. I scoured the credits for this film, and I did not see a mention of Gary Oldman. Are you bloody pulling my face off of my face,
Richard,
and feeding it
and
to
wearing
me?
it as a oh right. No, and Richard, if you'll give me a second to just scroll to where I've written about this on my Google Doc, I'll fill you in.
Oh, sorry, I
completely.
have jumped the gun.
No, that's not it. That's not it, Richard. So Gary Oldman, who, by the way, this is the 8th film we've seen of his for film franchise Fortnights, after the 4 Harry Potter movies he's in,
Kung Fu Panda
Dawn
2.
of the Planet of the Apes, Kung Fu Panda 2, and the RoboCop remake. He initially, at least, was uncredited for his role in this, as there's a few reasons why. Some make it sound like it was like a billing issue. Some he's like Gary Oldman's like, no, that's part of the joke, was that
It's a
Gary
character
Oldman
without a
would
face.
it's a character without a face, and he said that they all thought it would be funny if the man of 1,000 faces suddenly played a man with no face. Because Gary Oldman at the time had done Dracula, he'd done, all these exciting
1,000
roles.
different faces.
1,000 different faces.
Yeah. It's funny, like, I knew going into this movie, I've known for years, for over a decade, that, oh my god, did you know that guy is actually Gary Oldman? And I've seen people on Reddit or whatever be astonished to find out that it was him. And you know what? He's pretty good in it, and I mean, I fucking hate looking at the character, but yeah, but in like wide shots, you can tell it's Gary Oldman.
Really?
Yeah, I reckon.
Okay, interesting. I think that'd be the wide shots and not the close-ups.
Well, when there's less, you can see less, because he's wearing full prosthetics over his face, and so. Right. But like when you just seeing like the shape of his head and his hairline, I'm like, that's Gary Oldman.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought this film was real bad, Richard. I think it's one of those sequels as well, which borderline does some like irreparable damage to the original film. Like, I really dislike how much it's emphasized that Lecter is specifically in love with Clarice. He kisses her at the end, and I think it's just less interesting to be that explicit with it. Like, it's always way more interesting to have it like bubbling beneath the surface, and you'd be like, is this it? Like Silence of the Lambs is about as intense as I want to see their relationship be. Like, I think that's where it's at its most captivating. And I don't know, I was just so bewildered by the decisions this movie makes. We'll get more into this, but it draws a lot more attention to the gore and violence. Yeah. And I think
it's gross.
It ends up it's just silly as well. And it makes Hannibal a silly character, and it makes the franchise feel cheesier. I think these things are scarier when you're not seeing them, because you're like, this is such a grounded, normal movie. How can this guy have done these supposedly horrific things? But in this movie, you see all these horrific things, and it adds this this movie's like a sugar rush. Like, we know we've spent 10 years being terrified of the horror of the Silence of the Lambs. Let's make another one and just go whole hog into it and show all these gross, disgusting things that he'll do when he's eating people. And there's a very famous scene before the end of this film.
I've known about. I learned about this film's existence because I learned about this scene.
Yeah, I remember seeing it on like Sky Movies, just this scene, and I remembered it, but rewatching it now, I was like, this is horrific. Yeah, like this is like ruining the film with how gross it
I will say like that, like Ridley Scott and everyone involved probably thought, the scene is supposed to be gross.
Yeah, but it's too gross.
It's too gross. I hated it.
So do you want to describe what it's right at the end of the film?
Right at the end of the film, it's Ray Liotta has been
who's like a dirty cop, that's a dirty FBI agent who's been doing deals with Verger to try and capture Hannibal so that Verger can murder Hannibal.
Yeah, and so he has this. Yeah, he cuts takes the like skull cap off of Hannibal off of Ray Liotta to leave his brain exposed, and then there's the sort of like sack that covers your brain, and he slices that open, peels it off back, and then cuts out a little bit of Ray Liotta's brain, and he talks about how we can actually live without parts of our brain, sort of thing, and you can actually like and it's completely true. You can perform like brain surgery on someone who's fully conscious, and because there's no actual receptors on the pain receptors on the brain or anything. And he cuts a piece off, fries it up, and feeds it to Ray Liotta himself, and makes Clarice watch this whole thing. And from what I understand of the Hannibal TV show, it is like this guy is taking such care with preparing this food, and it's like, oh, that looks mouth-watering, but I know the horrible secret. It's this really like conflicted thing. This is just like, okay, he's got some nice herbs and some garlic, but he just chucks it in the fucking pan. It's in the pan for like, we see the shot of the pan for like 2 seconds, and it's like, if you are showing me this, I want the grossness to be juxtaposed with the beauty of the cooking. Otherwise, you just have this fucking gross scene.
Yeah. And Richard, these sentiments they go deeper than you might just think. It's not just you who thought these scenes were gross, but they may well be the point of no return for how bad this movie is, because after Thomas Harris finished writing the Hannibal novel, which he was pressured into doing, he sent copies to Jonathan Demme, Jodie Foster, Ted Talley, and Sir Anthony Hopkins for approval. Three of those people did not return to make this movie, right? The screenplay was rewritten no less than 15 times because of dissatisfaction, mainly from Jonathan Demme and Jodie Foster over the new character elements. In a 2010 Biography Channel documentary, Inside Story, The Silence of the Lambs, Jonathan Demme said, Tom Harris, as unpredictable as ever, took Clarice and Dr. Lecter's relationship in a direction that just didn't compute for me. And Clarice is drugged up and she's eating brains with him, which she doesn't actually do in the film, and I just thought, I can't do this. De Laurentiis, the producer, said of Demme's decision to decline, when the Pope dies, we create a new Pope. Good luck to Jonathan Demme. Goodbye. He later said that Demme felt that he could not make a sequel as good as Silence of the Lambs, and after years of being actively involved in getting the sequel funded, getting it made, getting it, finally on track, and all these screenplay drafts, Jodie Foster was like, no, I'm not going to do this. She issued a statement at the time saying, I have been offered more money than ever in my career to make this film, but who cares if it betrays Clarice, who has become like a person to me. You look for the production notes all over the internet for this film. Everyone who turned it down is like, it's too gross, it's yuck. The word lurid is thrown around quite a lot. Like, it's basically everyone who didn't return was like, it's too far. Like, it's not as classy as Silence of the Lambs.
That's the thing, and I hate the title of this film. I hate the poster for this film. I hate everything this film stands for. And I hate Mason Verger. The fucking Mitch McConnell looking motherfucker.
Well, when Jodie Foster declined to reprise the role of Clarice Starling, Julianne Moore beat... You ready? You want to hear who
John
nearly
Lithgow.
played? John Lithgow auditioned for Clarice. No, we've got Gillian Anderson, Jennifer Aniston, Christina Applegate, Drew Barrymore, Kate Beckinsale, Kate Blanchett, Sandra Bullock, Jennifer Connelly, Kristen Davis, Cameron Diaz, Shannon Doherty, Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Nicole Eggert, Callista Flockhart, Bridget Fonda, Terry Hatcher, Helen Hunt, Angelina Jolie, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Lucy Liu, Heather Locklear, Alyssa Milano, Gwyneth Paltrow, Sarah Jessica Parker, Meg Ryan, Winona Ryder, Brooke Shields, Hilary Swank, and Denise Richards. Every woman working in Hollywood at the time
who do
was
you
basically
think,
going for this
who
role.
would you pick?
Julianne Moore is obviously the best choice out of any of them.
I think Helen Hunt's a good choice.
Actually, that's a good point. They do have a similar cadence in their voice. I could see Helen Hunt saying he could smell my cunt, whatever she says.
Exactly. But the other thing that's interesting about this film is that, this was a 10 years later sequel to a Best Picture winning film. This would be like if this year we saw the release of Solomon, a too far gross movie about Solomon Northup from 12 Years a Slave.
Very good.
But yeah, it's like a Misses the Point sequel.
Yeah, absolutely. Though not all would agree with that, Richard, because fucking loved this film. Loved Hannibal.
Who?
Fucking Ridley Scott, dude. So this Ridley Scott was so into it. Everything we've just said is bad about it. Ridley Scott loved it. They read the book. They were like, this... Dino De Laurentiis said, this is going to make an unbelievable film. That was like their position. Like, this is so edgy and chaotic. He said he visited he visited Ridley Scott on the set of Gladiator to offer him the job to direct Hannibal. Scott misunderstood which Hannibal he meant, thinking De Laurentiis was speaking of the general and historical figure from Carthage, who nearly brought down the Roman Empire back in 200 BC. So he replied, basically, Dino, I'm doing a Roman epic right now. I don't want to do elephants coming over the Alps next, old boy. And Dino then clarified, no, Hannibal Lecter. and Ridley immediately accepted. And they were like, "This is going to change the world." There's a quote from Anthony Hopkins reading the script, and he's just after he read the book, and he's like, "I kind of hate this, but at the same time, it's kind of interesting." So like everyone is just on completely different wavelengths, and it shows in the film. It's just chaotic.
This was like, for someone who was, to be honest, sleepy and quite grumpy, it was such a miserable experience watching this film.
I reckon Ridley Scott was on coke or something making this film. It's got a coke binge, like a coke bender kind of vibe to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Such an iconic poster that I fucking hate, though.
What don't you like about it?
I don't know. It just just feel like it doesn't sell the film right.
So what are we talking? We're talking about a very creepy looking Anthony Hopkins with like a red eye sort of peeking out from a shadow.
Yeah, but it also kind of looks like a crescent moon the more I look at it.
Sounds like you quite like it.
Well, he kind of looks like... Well, now,
Only
the more I look at him,
right
the more I look at him, he looks like Mac Tonight. The short-lived McDonald's mascot.
Turned alt-right hate symbol. Officially registered as a hate symbol. Yeah. Wow. Let's officially register Hannibal as a hate symbol.
I'm gonna... Are you seeing it how I'm seeing it?
I'm not looking at it.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm gonna... I'm gonna doodle on it. And this is gonna be funny. You can keep talking.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's Mac Tonight.
It's Mac Tonight. Anyway, yeah. So what else is new?
The part of Mason Verger, I think this is the most interesting piece of behind the scenes trivia for this film. It was originally offered to. You'll never guess who was originally offered the role of Mason Verger.
Mac Tonight. I mean,
Mac Tonight.
I meant to say John Lithgow, but I was just thinking about Mac Tonight.
No, get this. It was offered, and you'll be like, wow, you'll either love this or hate this. It was offered to Christopher Reeve.
Okay, yeah.
Paralyzed from the waist down, or neck down, I think. Wheelchair-bound Christopher Reeve, he'd done a movie called Above Suspicion in 1995, where he was a wheelchair-bound police officer. So they were like, hey, Christopher Reeve, this is you could almost argue this is progressive, right?
Yeah,
hey, Christopher Reeve, do you want to play
We've got a tetraplegic character.
Yeah. And Reeve was like, let me read the novel. Like, maybe let me read the novel, see what I think. And after reading the novel, he ultimately declined upon realizing that Verger was a quadriplegic, facially disfigured child rapist, is the official quote.
And also, I am to understand Mason's death is quite different in the novel and the TV show.
Yeah, I have a whole section later on that we'll go into the differences between.
We've got whole sections to go.
Whole sections, Richard. I've planned the episode like this, and it's not fun to read stuff. But before we move on to Red Dragon, Richard, I've got a rare example of great IMDb trivia for you. A great piece of IMDb trivia I found. When Gary Oldman showed up on set as Mason Verger, all the cast outside of Anthony Hopkins and a majority of the crew had no idea who the actor in the elaborate makeup was. Some were convinced it was Jared Leto due to his resemblance to Verger.
Wow.
They thought he looked like Jared Leto. Do you have anything else you wanted to say about Hannibal? You've just sent me a picture I'm going to look at. Where Richard has doodled out the Mac Tonight face on the Hannibal poster. That's great. We can post that on Instagram.
I need to put sunglasses on him so he looks like Mac Tonight.
Look, can we just hold off on Red Dragon? I got to put sunglasses on my Mac Tonight drawing.
All right, you move on. I'll
Red Dragon came out in 2002. Guess who directed this one?
Brett Ratner.
The Rat Ratner, and I love this. You look at the Hannibal franchise thus far, and it's like, oh my god, the inimitable Michael Mann. You've got the visionary Jonathan Demme. You've got the inimitable Ridley Scott, and then you've got Brett Ratner, the Rush Hour guy, who's like, by all accounts, like a real sleaze bag. Brett Ratner directed this. Do you know what it has on Rotten Tomatoes, Richard? The percentage this has on Rotten Tomatoes, I don't want to overstate things, but it is the funniest number I've ever seen.
69.
It is 69. It has 69% on Rotten Tomatoes, and I feel that accurately depicts how just not good enough this film is, I guess. But do you want to tell us what Red Dragon, a film we've already discussed an original adaptation on, do you want to tell us what it's about?
It's about the same thing as Manhunter.
Yes. It has a slightly different ending. Instead of, in Manhunter, Will Graham takes down Dolarhyde in his home, and in Red Dragon, you're made to think he kills himself before it turns out he shot like a person he'd already killed, and then blew his house up, and then Dolarhyde goes to Will Graham's home where he tries to kidnap his kid, and they have a big shootout, and the good guys win and the bad guys lose. You've got, starring as Will Graham this time, you've got Edward Norton, starring as Francis Dolarhyde. You've got Ralph Fiennes, starring as Jack Crawford. You've got Harvey Keitel. Who else is in this movie? Anthony Hopkins. Philip Seymour Hoffman plays Freddie Lowndes. What did you think of this film?
I liked this one more than Hannibal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which is weird that I like any Brett Ratner film more than a
Ridley Scott film, yeah. If this had come out, before Hannibal, or there was no Hannibal, you'd be like, oh yeah, cool, a inferior sequel to a good movie. But instead it's like, oh yeah, you got this fine movie, but it's like you had one movie that just made me so dang mad.
Yeah, exactly. And like Manhunter, I haven't read the novel, but Manhunter proves like you could take the bones of the story and make a good film out of it. I think the bones of the Hannibal novel are bad, so I think the problem with Red Dragon 2002 is that for me it was just really hard watching another adaptation of Red Dragon after Manhunter did it so well, especially in the parts where, as you said before, the dialogue is identical to the movie we'd already watched. And the only thing this movie really offered me was it reiterated some slightly unclear plot machinations from Manhunter that I didn't catch on the first time. Otherwise, I thought didn't really give me anything. I didn't think the cast did very well with the material, even though I like all the actors involved. And Richard, we talk about taglines now on this podcast, and here's one of the taglines for Red Dragon. I thought we could discuss it. It says, "The first and most terrifying chapter in the Hannibal Lecter trilogy." Now, firstly, it calls it a Hannibal Lecter trilogy, thus saying that Manhunter is not included. But secondly, like, does it not feel kind of anticlimactic to be like, yeah, the first chapter was the most terrifying? I think without acknowledging it, prequels, well, any sequel ideally is better than the one that came before it. And a prequel being a type of sequel, I think it's okay if a prequel is better than the original, but it's like, it's weird to phrase it like that, to be like, if you go back to the beginning, it was way better. It was way more enticing.
Also, it's like, then what's-his-face would go on to write an even more first and even more terrifying chapter.
Yeah. Red Dragon, Richard, is our 8th Anthony Hopkins film for film franchise Fortnights, after the other 2 Hannibal movies, Thor 1, 2, and 3, Mission Impossible 2, and Transformers The Last Night, where he gets like, he's in an explosion and just yeets off the screen. It's so funny.
It's so good.
It's also our 7th Ray.
Don't you, dude?
You want to know, don't you, dude? It's also our 7th Ralph Fiennes film after the last 4 Harry Potters, plus Skyfall and Spectre. And if you count No Time to Die, which we didn't officially cover as film franchise Fortnights, that brings them up to 8. And it's our 5th Harvey Keitel film after National Treasure 1 and 2, From Dusk Till Dawn, and Little Fockers, which is not the only sort of DNA it shares with the Meet the Parents trilogy, because both the series that a lot of people don't know start with this obscure film that is a bit more...
That's good.
Screenwriter Ted Talley, who wrote The Silence of the Lambs but not Hannibal, had turned down many offers to write more serial killer stories. He was like, no, I'm done. But when he was offered this, he liked the idea of Hopkins forming a trilogy, and he said, if it ends here, it will end gracefully. I would hate to see this become Hannibal Lecter X111, so Hannibal Lecter 13, which, if you don't have a good continue the franchise yet, Richard, I thought that could start as a
Thank you,
place.
Until now, completely forgot that was part of our podcast.
Yeah. Edward Norton and Ralph Fiennes admired The Silence of the Lambs but had not enjoyed Hannibal. They thought it was too gross. That's what they said. They thought it was too gross. The cast were persuaded to join when they were like, no, the screenwriter for Silence of the Lambs is coming back. Fiennes felt it only worked only on suspense without overt violence. I like that basically the whole world looks back on Hannibal 2001 as being this wacky out there sequel which no one was really on board with. And even the people who made the next one, which came out a year later, were like, yeah, that was fucked up. Anthony Hopkins returning to the role in this film makes him the only actor to have ever revisited an Oscar-winning performance twice. I thought that was pretty interesting. Plenty have reprised their roles for one sequel. You've got things like Tommy Lee Jones in the Fugitive sequel, U.S. Marshals, or Joaquin Phoenix is returning to Joker and Joker Folie à Deux. There's a bunch of other examples. But in my research, I can't find anyone else who's done a third go-round other than Anthony Hopkins. And what does that say about acting? What does that say about the performance? I just think that's interesting. There's a, this like, when will someone win a second Oscar for a performance they've already won an Oscar for? Will that happen one day? That'd be quite interesting.
Yeah, but have people been nominated twice for the same character? I believe
Probably.
Cate Blanchett for Queen Elizabeth.
Ah, yeah. During filming, Michael Jackson made a surprise visit to the set.
Oh, yeah.
He and director Brett Ratner had known each other since Ratner's music video career. And imagine you're on this this film set of this series that's like famous for these like terrifying villains and these like disfigured monsters, and then Michael Jackson shows up. This is 2002 as well, so the allegations were like primed and ready to go, I believe.
Oh, yeah. So, Stallone was nominated for playing Rocky twice. Paul Newman for playing Fast Eddie in The Hustler and The Color of Money. He won the second time. Cate Blanchett for playing Elizabeth twice. Also, the Paul Newman ones were 25 years apart.
Wow, that's great. Well, how far were the Rocky ones apart?
So Rocky holds the record for longest, which was 39 years. And
so that's with Creed, right?
Yeah. But he didn't win either. Al Pacino nominated twice for Michael Corleone, but he didn't win. And Peter O'Toole played King Henry II twice. Bing Crosby won an Oscar for Going My Way, and then the sequel that came out, The Bells of St. Mary's, that came out the next year. He was also nominated but didn't win. So I don't think anyone's won twice.
No, right. Yeah. It was interesting. I was looking, before looking up these films, I was like, this is going to be like a back-to-back production situation where 10 years later, they're like, let's adapt the other
10
novels.
10 years later, you could, if you do one, you have to do two.
Yeah. But that doesn't seem to be the case at all. Like, apparently Hopkins didn't even know if he wanted to do Red Dragon. He was like, oh, is 3 too many to do? So, like, even though they came out a year later, there must have been like a 4-year production cycle for both films, maybe. I don't know. Which is surprising to me because it feels like this whole thing was like they're so desperate for Harris to write another novel for them to adapt. Why wouldn't you make a Red Dragon adaptation like a year after Silence of the Lambs?
Well, they'd already made one.
Yeah, but it's not in anyone's mind. Maybe you wait like 10 years since Manhunter. You know what I mean? Like, and it's because Hannibal's supposed to be younger in Red Dragon than he is in Silence of the Lambs, but he's 11 years older. And so, like, and he lost like 20 kgs or something to play like a younger version. And I think it works, and it's not incredibly distracting. He has a little ponytail at the start before he gets arrested. Yeah, that was distracting. But like, I don't know. It's just surprising that like they had to force Thomas Harris to write this like inferior new novel instead of just adapting the other book. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think it's interesting that the book was written first as well, because we've talked off and on over the years about like what is the purpose of a prequel? How should a prequel work? What should a prequel offer an original film? And I think this is a pretty good idea for a prequel. So I'm surprised the book was written first, because how Hannibal got arrested is a good prompt to be, you want to know the origins of how he got arrested.
You want to know, don't you, dude?
You want to know, don't you, dude? And quid pro quo. The fact that he's a minor player overall works as well in favor, because whether or not Hannibal survives the film is not where the stakes are at. You know, you're not the usual problem that comes with something being a prequel is not relevant in this prequel. I think it's a good prequel, like conceptually.
Yeah.
You know, it's not I don't think the film was very good, and I think that the final scene is an example of the worst prequel trope. It ends with after the bad guy's being caught, the prison warden's talking to Hannibal, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, there's this FBI agent. She's come in to talk to you. I'll tell her you're not interested."
She's got a.
That felt too far.
Yeah, I felt it as I said it.
I'll bleep that one. and Hannibal says, "What's her name?" And that's like, ugh, we really got to set this up. We really got to set up Silence of the Lambs. I thought that sucked. But like,
yeah,
there's some all right stuff in this movie. I just think Manhunter does it better. And maybe if I hadn't seen Manhunter, I would have been more like moved by this.
Yeah.
What do you think of like...
Yeah.
Yep.
No?
What do you think of like the performances of like Ralph Fiennes and Philip Seymour Hoffman and stuff?
Oh, I mean, love seeing Philip Seymour Hoffman in anything. I do think that it is this. I do think Anthony Hopkins isn't as good. I think that the mystique of seeing him less in Silence of the Lambs adds to the character.
Yes, absolutely.
And
100% agree.
I think that that's a big issue with Hannibal, the film. And yeah, it's like Sheldon syndrome. They focus on him too. Sheldon was the best character in The Big Bang Theory, and then they focused on him too dang much.
And that show, young Sheldon, is still going to this day. It's very popular. It's very successful.
Has it finished now, I think?
I don't know, but I think there's better examples of what you're talking about.
No,
things
I think
like
the best one.
Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean, I think, is a good example of a character who is best used sparingly.
I think
young Sheldon takes the cake.
Yeah. Oh no, it's still going.
What do you have anything else you want to say about Red Dragon, or shall we march forward to 2007?
Do you know what the theme song to Young Sheldon is?
Yes.
Yeah. Mighty Little Man by Steve
Burns. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that's crazy. I didn't know
the
that.
Blues Clues, Steve.
Yeah, it's like a song you and I both. You referenced it to me one time, and I was like, "Is that a Mighty Little Man reference?" And we were both impressed that the other person knew it.
I didn't even remember. That's how I appreciate
maybe it wasn't you then. Anywho,
I feel like if it was me, I would have then said, "Did you know that's the theme song to Young Sheldon?"
This was before Young Sheldon debuted, I'm pretty sure.
Wait, so I didn't know about the song until Young Sheldon.
Well, look.
A show I've never watched.
Who knows, dude?
Hannibal Rising came out in 2007. It was directed by a guy named Peter Weber. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
This feels like a 15.
It's 15% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, it is. But how poetic that we have this trilogy of Anthony Hopkins films, and either side of each film is this other Hannibal film that no one's heard of.
That are 80% apart.
Yeah. What is Hannibal Rising about?
So it's like... it starts at the tail end of World War II. He's a little boy, and then he goes out hunting Nazis, and it's a whole like revenge thing, and it's like, he has this little sister named Misha who he cares very deeply for, and they sort of lose their parents in the war, and some Nazis find them and end up eating his little sister, and so years later he's got like the taste for blood. And he goes and hunts the Nazis that ate his sister. It's revealed in the end that he also ate his sister, though. He just blocked it out of his mind, and that's supposedly why he's killing people, is because he doesn't want them to know. He has, like, a love affair with his auntie or something in it. And it's basically just the origin story of Hannibal Lecter. This was, again, based on a novel, though. Again, a novel that was written very reluctantly, as I said before, written at the same time as the screenplay. What did you think of this film? Didn't like it. No, I just thought it was stupid and lame. And so Hannibal Lecter, I don't want to see Hannibal rise. I don't want to see his rise be from, he's a fucking guy.
Well, boo-hoo, you ate your little sister.
No, it's like, I don't want to see the rise of Hannibal as this vengeful guy hunting down Nazis who tears people open. The interesting part of Hannibal's origin is that he's a psychiatrist, and that in the first film, in Silence
That's
of the Lambs, he says a few words to the guy who made the comment to Jodie Foster. He speaks to him, and that guy fucking bites his own tongue out. And it's like the fact that and that's his superpower. That also like he got Mason Verger to eat his own face just by talking to him. And it's like the fact that there was a psychiatrist having patients for potentially decades who had this ability to manipulate people like that, and on the side was a cannibal, is so much more interesting than this film.
Than how he first got a taste for cannibalism. Yeah. Well, look, I thought it was okay. I gave this movie 3 stars. I think Hannibal and Red Dragon are films that are shackled with being sequels to Silence of the Lambs. They seem to constantly want to remind you of Silence of the Lambs, whereas this one seems relatively liberated from that. It's just doing its own thing. It's a Hopkins-free, competent little revenge horror. At worst, I thought it was boring, maybe unoriginal, but I think it's better than the hyperactive nonsense of Hannibal and the dead on arrival Red Dragon. And I also think that Gaspard Thomas Ulliel, who plays young Hannibal, I thought he was pretty good. It's not like a bad performance. He looks the part, he's quite creepy, it never feels like it's going too far, it never feels like it's going into cheesy territory. He makes it his own, while it's also believable that this guy will one day become the Anthony Hopkins version.
Did you see Gaspard Ulliel passed away a year ago, last year?
Yes, last year, isn't it? What, a skiing accident?
Yeah. Gwyneth Paltrow's whereabouts unknown at the time of the incident.
Speaking of death, Richard, I also thought the death scenes in this film were pretty good. There's one where he's capturing these Nazis that ate his sister, and he ties one up to a tree and wraps a rope around him, ties the other into a horse, and is like getting him to tell him information while he's slowly pulling. And like the horse runs, and it does this brief close up of this guy's eyes bulging. I thought it looked quite good. And he gets decapitated. There's another one where he traps a guy in like the embalming fluid at a morgue. They were fun. They were fun deaths. And like, I reckon this is so critically despised because after so many years, people were just so sick of the Hannibal lightning trying to strike twice. And so when you do an origin story, everyone is immediately like, oh, like, here we go, this origin story bullshit, it's never great. People don't like a new actor taking over an iconic character. It's tried, I get it. And it's not like I'm saying this was particularly great, but like I'd put a couple thousand movies between this and Silence of the Lambs and Manhunter, but I'd put Hannibal and Red Dragon even further below Hannibal Rising.
I probably preferred Red Dragon to this.
Fair enough. I think that's probably
I liked Leatherface more than this. I think back to Leatherface a lot. The one that's
Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre one.
The version of this that's for Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah. Like, because there you have like this handsome, cool young dude and this big hulking guy who looks like Leatherface. And you go about the whole movie, and then at the end, the big hulking guy dies and the main handsome guy gets disfigured. And it's like, oh, he's actually the one destined to be Leatherface this whole time. I think
it's such an...
I think as much as I predicted that twist, I think every Rising prequel should have that twist.
Well, I don't know about that, but I do think that's such an obvious thing of how to fundamentally change your story with a prequel, something that's quite hard to do. And I'm surprised not more prequels have done it. I remember back when the Star Wars prequel trilogy was coming out, there were theories that actually Ewan McGregor was playing the man who would become Darth Vader, and that Hayden Christensen wasn't, and they for some reason would switch identities in the last film. And I think that could be effective. But yeah. I'm not necessarily interested in defending this movie. I just was watching it, and the third act, I was pretty enthralled by it. Like, I was sitting there looking at the screen, taking it all in. I wasn't distracted, and I just thought it was effective. And the Rotten Tomatoes critical consensus reads, Hannibal Rising reduces the horror icon to a collection of dime store psychological traits. And I can understand that, but I think it's far from the worst origins of a psycho film. So I would prefer this to Leatherface. I'd prefer this to, I don't know,
Silence
give me
of the
another
Lambs.
one. One more note, the film opened at number 2 in the United States with a $13.4 million opening in 3,000 theaters, finished behind Norbit,
Oh,
which
damn.
made $33.7 million, released the same week. I bet Norbit's worse than Hannibal Rising.
I saw Norbit in the cinema.
Is it better than Hannibal Rising?
Yes.
Okay. So according to IMDb, the actors that screen tested for the role of young Hannibal included Hayden Christensen, Macaulay Culkin, Hugh Dancy, Rupert Friend, Dominic Cooper, Tom Sturridge, and Tom Payne. I feel like half of those probably aren't true, though. That doesn't sound real,
Hugh
especially when the
Dancy,
guy that
who goes on to play Will Graham in the TV series.
So that one is true. That one is
Right.
true. But I don't think Hayden Christensen or Macaulay Culkin were in talks. I think when you end up with relatively unheard of Gaspard Ulliel, like, I don't think you would go with him if Macaulay Culkin's on the table.
Yeah,
You
right.
know? Well, maybe you would. Maybe he was right for the
We
part.
could have got Culkin. That's what they would have said.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about with this film, with Hannibal Rising?
No, didn't like it.
Didn't like it? Well, would you like to know the difference between the books and films?
No.
Damn, that's devastating, because a lot of work was put in to putting these differences together.
Damn,
I reached
that
out
sucks,
to
man. All right.
I reached out to Rachel on our Discord. Shout out to Rachel, because she has for years, she doesn't listen to the podcast. This will be the first episode she's listening to. And for years she's been going on and on about how Hannibal will be the first episode of the podcast she listens to. So I reached out to her and I said, in the next 7 hours or so, would you be able to tell me any notable deviations from the Hannibal novels? And she said, yep, I can do that. And Rachel, thank you so much, but you did so much more than what I was like major notable deviations. Her first note is Will Graham's son has got a different name in the book and in the 2 adaptations.
Right.
I was looking for probably more substantial things than that. But thank you so much for doing this. And maybe we should post these differences somewhere, because I feel like there's a lot, people can
It's
probably
a heavy
use these
burden
as discussion points. Yeah.
to just for only you to know.
Yeah. So I've picked out a few interesting differences, and we can talk about them. So the one that I thought was really interesting is that one of the reasons that Dolarhyde in Red Dragon and Manhunter, he snaps and actually goes to kill his new girlfriend, is because he incorrectly sees her and their work colleague together and assumes that she's two-timing him. But in the book, apparently that character is her ex-boyfriend, so there is actually precedent there for him to believe it. In the Red Dragon book, Will and Hannibal only have one interaction when Will goes to see him for the first time. They don't talk on the phone like in Manhunter or continue to have visits like in the Red Dragon movie, and Hannibal only appears in 2 scenes. That's meeting that they have, and the scene where he calls and tricks the lady into giving him Will's home address. Rachel says that the book explores way more of Dolarhyde's backstory, and that half the book follows Will and half the book follows Dolarhyde. So that's pretty interesting that, the book essentially has 2 protagonists, one being the killer. And I think the Manhunter does it better than Red Dragon, where halfway through the film it stops and just starts following this other guy all of a sudden, and I really liked that. I thought that was a really effective way of doing it. In Silence of the Lambs, Will is mentioned a few times in the novel. Chilton mentions Jack is upset that Hannibal cut up his protege after he defeated Dolarhyde.
That'll get to you.
Yeah. And Hannibal asks Clarice how Will looks now, and she doesn't know. Famously, Fava Beans and a nice Chianti in the book is Fava Beans and a big Amarone. I don't know how to pronounce that. This was changed because Amarone was a wine not available in the United States at the time of filming.
I've seen people saying that it's like, oh, Fava Beans is like, there's something about the fact that apparently it's a joke, that it's like, oh yeah, so he's on monoamine oxidase inhibitors, which have been used to treat him, and the three things you can't eat while taking them are liver, beans, and wine.
Oh, right. That's another layer to the joke
yeah.
that I didn't know about at all. At the end of the Silence of the Lamb novels, Clarice is sleeping with the confirmation, yes, the lambs have stopped screaming. It sounds like Hannibal, the novel, has the most like drastic changes from the book, and a bit of a content warning here for sort of, I guess you'd say sexual assault would be the umbrella term for a lot of this stuff. Mason Verger is explicitly more pedophilic. There's a lot more. He runs like a Christian camp and he drinks children's tears. And Rachel says basically, if you think Mason is a cartoony villain in the movie, he's 10 times more so in the book. Margot Verger, Mason's sister, is completely omitted from the movie. Mason was explicitly abusive to her in every conceivable way from when they were children onwards. She carries a lot of trauma from it. She is a lesbian in the book. She's a lesbian, I guess, in the movie where she doesn't appear as well. And she went to therapy with Lecter before he was caught, and he encouraged her to kill Mason, and then Mason starts seeing Lecter for therapy. And so the reason why Hannibal doesn't like and gets Mason to cut his own face off is because he doesn't like how he treated his sister. And in the books, Mason is not killed by Cordell pushing him into the pit of man-eating pigs, which I thought was so well set up in the movie. It's weird that it wasn't this in the books. In the books, he is sodomized with an eel by Margot, and then so that she can get his semen, so that she can impregnate her girlfriend with the Verger heir and thus get the fortune, and then kills him by shoving the eel into his mouth. And Lecter tells her to frame him for the murder, which she does.
Yeah. Rachel's the expert. What I read is that he's sodomized with a cattle prod and then suffocates on an eel on his own pet moray.
You're correct.
Eel.
I read the wrong thing. He's not sodomized with the eel. What a disturbing insight into how I picture these stories. So in the movie, Cordell, his butler, pushes him into the thing of pigs, and Hannibal's like, why don't you push him in, Cordell? He's like, hey Cordell, why don't you push him in? You can always say it was me. And I quite liked that scene. I thought it was great. More so, probably the biggest change from the movie, and Ridley Scott himself was like, I don't think I'm going to adapt it this way, is Hannibal saves Clarice and drugs her, and they essentially work through her trauma and anger together. Krendler, who is Ray Liotta's character, gets captured, but instead of Hannibal and Krendler being the only two to consume him, it's Hannibal and Clarice eating his brain in the book. After dinner, she basically says, hey, so I can't be a replacement for your sister. Sorry you have to give up your mother's breast for her, but here, you don't have to give this one up. And then she offers him her breast, and he accepts it. And Rachel posts just from Wikipedia here that 3 years later, Barney and his girlfriend go to Buenos Aires to see Johannes Vermeer painting. At the opera, Barney spots Lecter and Starling. Fearing for his life, he flees with his girlfriend. Lecter and Starling are seen living together in an exquisite Beaux Arts mansion where they employ servants and engage in activities such as learning new languages and dancing together and building their own respective memory palaces. Moreover, the reader is told that sex is a splendid structure they add to every day, and that psychoactive drugs have had no part in their lives for a long time, and that Lecter is satisfied with the fact that Misha, his sister, who's not actually mentioned in the movie but is in Hannibal Rising, cannot return. So, bafflingly, mind-blowingly, Hannibal and Clarice get together in the books, and that's how the books canonically end.
Don't love that.
No, I fucking hate that. There's a bunch of stuff Rachel also listed from Hannibal Rising that's different, but I didn't I don't think anyone's going to care about it. So we'll end it there. But thank you so much, Rachel. And feel free in the discussion thread for this episode on the Discord to talk about all of this stuff. Sorry I couldn't get through all of it. It's very extensive and very well researched. So well done, Rachel. All right, Richard. Well, now it's time to move on to continue the franchise. This is a segment where we pitch continuations of the franchise. And while we're out of Thomas Harris novels, the Hannibal franchise is still being continued on in many various ways. Most famously would be the NBC TV series Hannibal, created by Brian Fuller, we mentioned before. It stars Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal Lecter and Hugh Dancy as Will Graham. Do you fancy Hugh Dancy?
That is some very clever wordplay, AJ.
Hannibal, the TV show, takes place before Red Dragon and examines the working relationship between Will Graham and Hannibal. It's a case of the week episode where every episode is Will Graham consulting Hannibal on some like horrific murder, and they're always like real creative. There's like a totem pole of dead bodies. There's people who've been turned into violins with their vocal cords being the strings and things like this. Have you said you'd seen a bit of it?
Yeah, I didn't. I'd forgotten about it until just recently. But yeah, I've seen maybe half the first season. I think.
Yeah, I've
but
seen the
not
first
since
two seasons.
First came out, and then you've seen 3 seasons.
First 2 seasons.
Oh.
I didn't watch the last season, but I remember thinking season 2 was like mind-blowingly good. Like it was excellent.
Yeah, right.
Season 1 was okay, but season 2 was great. And then I think season 3 is Red Dragon, or it borrows elements.
It was
from
it's
Red
sort of
Dragon.
setting up. I was just reading that like his plan originally was to do 3 seasons of setup of original material, a season of Red Dragon, 1 of Silence, 1 of Hannibal, and then a season of original material to wrap it up.
Yeah, right. And it got cancelled after 3 seasons, unfortunately. It was really good, but Will Graham has, in both Manhunter and Red Dragon, it's kind of alluded to that he has like this special power where he'll go to a crime scene and he can just understand exactly what went down. And this is like borderline a superpower in Hannibal, the TV series.
Yeah, I remember
And
Community making fun of
it's real cheesy, and it's the one thing I really hated about the show is like these gold flashes will go across the screen, and all of a sudden Hugh Dancy is the murderer in the scene, and he'll be like, I walk up to her and I slit her throat, and then every time his catchphrase was, "This is my design." And it was just I hated it. It was such a cheesy line and cheesy performance in a show that's otherwise was quite well acted. Mads Mikkelsen as Hannibal was incredible. There is also CBS's Clarice, TV show on a different network to Hannibal, desperately made from the scraps of what CBS could legally adapt. It is set between Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal, and I think it's supposed to be directly, like, I think it's supposed to exist in the Hopkins verse. Like, I don't think it's like the Mads Mikkelsen one where it's like its own continuity. So yeah, Hannibal went from 2013 to 2015 and got cancelled after 3 seasons. Clarice aired its first season in 2021 and is yet to be greenlit for a second, and it is sounding more unlikely by the fucking day that it's going to come back. I can't imagine what the show is about. There needs to be a name for this genre of show that is like spin-off of famous IP without the part that makes it an interesting IP in it. Yeah. You know, like Gotham and Batman, the Butler, Alfred, the origins of
Pennyworth,
Batman's
the
Butler.
origins of Alfred's Butler, which was cancelled. We'll never know the origins of.
Which was also like a V for Vendetta prequel by the end as well.
Really?
So like that, yeah. So that these shows where it's like they obviously don't have the rights to like the cornerstone of the franchise, so they. What the hell is a Clarice show going to be about? Anyway. Yeah. Sir Anthony Hopkins himself has also dabbled in the continue the franchise game, Richard, having reportedly written a script. I think maybe it's just an outline for a film called Hannibal Ending, which will have included Clarice ultimately killing Hannibal. Hopkins has stated that the screenplay was more of an exercise for himself than like a genuine attempt to get a film made. Yeah, right. He's also said that Red Dragon will be his final performance as the character. So there's also a cancelled video game that I dug up called Hannibal the Game, which according to IGN, Hannibal Lecter is at it again, and this time his appetite is bigger than ever. Take on the role of Special Agent Clarice Starling in this thrilling first-person shooter which has you hunting down one of the world's most brutal serial killers. On IGN, it's listed as status cancelled.
I'm sorry, AJ.
Yeah.
Pennyworth also being a prequel to V for Vendetta is the funniest fucking thing. That is insane.
The fact it connects V for Vendetta to Batman as well.
Yeah, god damn. Well, that is fucking insane. Anyway, sorry.
It's okay. I usually don't write down this stuff and continue the franchise, but I thought this was a particularly interesting version. There is a pre-scary movie spoof of Silence of the Lambs called The Silence of the Hams, which parodies Silence of the Lambs as well as Psycho and a few other movies. It follows FBI agent Joe D. Foster,
Nice.
played by Billy Zane, trying to catch a serial killer with the help of Dr. Animal Cannibal Pizza, played by Dom DeLuise.
Oh, wow.
It has, ready for this, 0% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Wow.
It has a very striking poster. It's a parody of the famous Silence of the Lambs poster, but with like a fat dude eating a donut or something. And I don't know. It caught my eye, and I was like, what the hell is the Silence of the Hams?
Nice.
It's hard to come up with a continue the franchise because my general inclination is you should just do isolated cases in which an investigator is forced to consult Hannibal, but that's essentially what the TV show is.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say, because my continue the franchise was to, the version of Hannibal Rising that I think is more interesting. That is,
yeah, right.
Although actually that's not really the TV show. I don't know. I want to see him.
No, it is though. Will Graham
Right.
gets counselling in the TV show from him. It's like
Oh, right,
a
yeah.
regular part of each episode is them having psychiatry sessions.
Okay, well then, I want to watch the TV show. Well, I don't. I'm not going to watch the TV show, but that's. I mean, my continue the franchise is. I want to see him as a working psychiatrist who fucking eats people and can manipulate them to do whatever he wants.
What about Hannibal X and it's in space?
Yeah, or Hannibal XII. And it's in space. Fuck
My
it.
continue
Or
franchise.
I want to do a crossover with the father and Hannibal. What if the father is actually secretly a sequel to Hannibal,
right, and it's a
and he forgets
reuniting
that he eats
his. So it's retroactively making it that someone has won an Oscar for the same character.
people? yeah, exactly.
Hey, Anthony Hopkins has returned as that character in The Sun.
Yeah,
So that's another one for the list.
yeah, wow.
So Anthony Hopkins has revisited an Oscar-winning character 3 times, not 2 times.
Well, it's funny, like
Between
what?
two-
Yeah, because if
two
you
characters.
say Anthony Hopkins has revisited an Oscar-winning character twice, either interpretation of that is correct.
Yeah. My continue the franchise is that the still working Thomas Harris, he published a novel in 2019, needs to just take his time and craft a proper sequel. Hannibal and Hannibal Rising were both novels that he was pressured by Hollywood into making, but with the franchise being long dormant and no one really caring about it, now is the time to make a new Hannibal story that doesn't destroy him and his relationship with the series, and set it in the same universe, and then we can inevitably adapt that. So that's my continue the franchise.
He's only made, so he's written 4 Hannibal Lecter books and 2 other books. Which, as you mentioned, the most recent one came out in 2019. It's his first book in 44 years to not feature Hannibal Lecter.
Wow.
But there's a quote here from Stephen King. So talking about if writing is sometimes tedious for authors, to Harris it is like writhing on the floor in agonies of frustration, because for Harris the very act of writing is a kind of torment.
Sounds like the dude is quite the tortured artist, to be honest. Yeah. Well, Richard, now all we've got left to do is to rank that franchise. So over on letterboxd.com/cultpopture, we've got a list of every franchise we've ever watched, and we rank them. I'm going to make it Silence of the Lambs as the entry point here. I'm going to say Manhunter is useful for context, but it's a separate canon. So I'll add The Silence of the Lambs as the first film in the franchise, representing the franchise. Where do we think that this one should go?
I think it's below the Nymphomaniac constant.
Do you reckon? I guess if we're not including Manhunter, it would be.
Yeah. Got one
That's a
great
good point.
film and then just 3 bad ones.
3 ones that get that of varying quality. Okay, so just beneath the Nymphomaniac constant is the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies, I think those are probably better than... No, actually, they're probably not. Maybe this is our first below the Nymphomaniac constant franchise. What do you reckon? I reckon Die Another Day offers much worse things than the Hannibal
they're bad in different
franchise.
ways, though.
Yeah, it's true.
Die Another Day
Well,
I could enjoy, ironically. Hannibal's just gross.
But beneath Pierce Brosnan is Pirates of the Caribbean, which I also think is worse than the Hannibal series, largely.
Interesting. Yeah, somewhere around there. Yeah, let's make it straight after Nymphomaniac. Why not?
One above Nymphomaniac is Anchorman.
Yeah, it's not as good as Anchorman.
Alrighty, well, let's go there then. The Hannibal series is the 83rd best franchise we've ever watched. And Richard, this brings us to a very exciting segment which we just don't get to do often. I believe it's my turn to make you guess as well.
Rats.
This is our segment we call Franchise Roulette, where we've got a big list of franchises, and we're going to pick a number at random, and then that will dictate the next franchise we watch in the next fortnight. So, Richard, we've got the list goes down to 106. What have we got?
We have got
6.
6. How often do we get a single-digit franchise? Oh boy, this is a good time to do this one. All right, we are talking about a 4-film franchise.
John Wick.
We're talking about one with a 5th film, I believe, about to start filming, but it's been a while since the 4th film.
Indiana
so it's like
Jones.
A big...
And
No.
you're just way off about the timeline.
No, it's coming up.
It comes out in a couple of months. They probably better start filming that 5th one.
There's some things I could say, but it would give it away, and I want you to guess.
Okay,
properly.
4th film. It's been a while since the 4th one. Are we talking, when you say a while, are we saying more than 10 years ago?
No, I don't think more than 10 years.
Okay. Are the 4 like a tight 4, or was the 4th one also a little bit late?
It was a very tight 4, yep. You often rave about one of these films, and I always think it's so arbitrary whenever you bring up the one that you rave about.
I know what you're talking about, yeah. This is the Hunger Games franchise.
We are covering the Hunger Games franchise next fortnight.
Which
this
is
feels
weirdly blown up all of a sudden.
Yeah, everyone's talking about Hunger Games at the moment. This feels well overdue for a film franchise Fortnights episode on the Hunger Games.
Yeah, and I believe it's not just starting filming, it comes out in December. Or November, I think.
Oh, really?
The 5th one, yeah.
Oh, I'm totally wrong then. I thought it was a year away at least. Our second Philip Seymour Hoffman franchise in a row as well.
Yeah. I'm excited to do this one. Because fuck, Catching Fire is good. It's so good. I know you think that's arbitrary.
AJ, I have a feeling you think that's arbitrary. Cool. Well, tune in next week, everybody, for next fortnight for the Hunger Games episode. We'll be back next week with some bullshit that we'll do to pad the time out. So stay tuned for that. And if you like this, please consider following us on Instagram and Twitter at @CultPopture. You can also join the Discord where you can discuss about what we've been discussing. We do a Cult Elders episode every month now, which is where we sort of reflect on the previous 3 episodes of the podcast. We get you, the listeners' opinions, if you're a particular tier on our Patreon. My call to action for the Cult Elders this week: send in your best Ted Levine Buffalo Bill impressions.
Yeah, no, give us your same with the Scooby Doo. Give us your 3 impressions: Buffalo Bill, Lecter, Starling,
Jodie Foster. And also, speaking of Patreon, if you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/cultpopture, and if you donate as little as $5 a month, you get to be involved in the post-credit scene, which is coming up just after this music ends. Richard, I'd love to stay and chat, but I have to go. I'm having an old pizza for dinner.
I will say,
there's actually half a pizza downstairs.
It didn't come up, but that's one of the all-time great final lines in a film.
Thank you.
I'm having an old friend for dinner.
Oh, you mean the film, not the podcast.
Not your pizza gag.
Welcome along to the post-credits scene. This is a segment at the end of each episode where if you donate $5 or more over at patreon.com/cultpopture, you get to give us something to talk about in this, the post-credits scene. Richard, who's it from and what is it?
This one's from Dylan Hutton, who says, what is one appliance you don't have but really want? I have all the ones. I've bought an air
Dick
fryer.
flattening machine.
I've bought an air fryer. I've bought an Instant Pot. The one, and I will say though, I mean, like I genuinely don't really have maybe a Roomba.
Yeah.
But and also
I should get a fucking Roomba.
Partly so that I can put the cats on it and film them, just going around on it. But one thing I will say that I find a fascinating piece of like society and culture is that we just decided we don't need dustbusters anymore. Nothing more.
I've got one.
Well,
it breaks all the time, so I never use it.
But like, you used to have a dustbuster in every home. You have a little slot where you hang it up on the wall. We never came up with something more advanced than the dustbuster. We just decided, like, if you saw a dustbuster in someone's house, you'd be like, "Oh, that's super out of date." I mean, you can get sort of modern looking ones, and miniature, and like it would be more like a miniature vacuum cleaner. But it's like the dustbuster hanging up in the kitchen in the little like stand that they have for them. And I'm picturing a very specific dustbuster. If someone had one of those in their house, you would think that was old fashioned. But there's not a new piece of technology that makes it old fashioned.
The problem is that the old dustbusters were just better because the new ones break all the time, I find. And I just think what we really need is a robuster dustbuster. That's actually true, as well as being hilarious. I am currently in the process of trying to figure out how to buy a new TV, and it is not easy. I am like watching reviews, I am looking online, and I'm still not reaching any clear-cut answers. I need to do the unthinkable, Richard, and go outside and into a store and just look at the TVs and decide what one I want to get. So yeah, my answer to this question is a TV.
Yeah.
It's the appliance I need to get because my one currently is too small.
I'm looking at old dustbusters, and man, I can remember how they smelled. Like, this is so nostalgic for me.
All right, well, we'll leave you guys there. Richard's, Jesus Christ, he's taking his pants off. Oh,
I don't have pants on. I don't have pants on.
He's jacking off, guys. He's jacking off to the old dustbusters. We'll see you there, everybody. Thank you for listening, and
we'll see you there.
We'll see you next time. We'll see you there. Everybody come in. Richard's jacking off.